Okay.
And usually, I want to say he just asks for the 3 points, but he may ask you like how to isolate a certain muscle, and just be like, well, you put slack in all the other agonist groups, so like all the other muscles that perform the same action, and things like that. So
Okay.
Okay. Now, when it comes to a kyphotic condition, why would that increase your risk for impingement?
I think if the scapula doesn't sit right, the scapula, your shoulder girdle doesn't sit right. So then when you do actions, you don't have proper shoulder, you don't have proper rotation, so then that muscle gets stuck under there and it can get impinged.
What muscle is it? Nope.
Your acromial ligament.
So that's the ligament.
And your supraspinatus.
Good. So it's your supraspinatus muscle that's being impinged. Because your supraspinatus comes down across your shoulder like this. And so if you look at these pictures, in the middle picture with the shoulder joint, there's a huge space between the acromion process and the humerus. And that's the part where the supraspinatus comes in. And also you have a subacromial bursa there, as well as having that coracoacromial ligament. And so if you have a kyphotic condition, that's going to have your scapulas are going to be in a protracted state. So that's going to decrease the amount of space that you have in there and limit your range of motion. Does that make sense? So like your acromion process could get in the way and pinch.
So because of like kyphosis, you don't have as much like room, and so it causes the pinching.
Yep, because the acromion process is going to be pulled more forward, and so that's going to be across your muscle, your supraspinatus, and so then when you move, it's going to pinch. And also just so involved with that is your coracoacromial ligament, that's also all in there, and so that space is limited, and so it increases your risk for impingement because it's going to pinch something.
So I thought it was the ligament that is being impinged.
Let's see, because I know it's a factor in it, but there's also at the end, it talks about,
I think you went too far.
oh,
Now you're in the elbow.
Yep. I just, thanks. Because under the rotator cuff, it talks about injuries. And it says the supraspinatus impingement on coracoacromial arch.
So it's the muscle that's being impinged,
That's what I'm understanding.
and the ligament's just kind of part of it.
So the ligament is involved with that impingement because because that ligament's there, that's also, it's not like necessarily having a bone there, but at the same time it is, because it would cause that limited movement, like, because if you have, so with this ligament here, if this is in a protracted state, that ligament is going to create a barrier on top of the glenohumeral joint, your shoulder. And so, because one of the characteristics of the coracoacromial ligament is that it says it provides protection for the underlying subacromial bursa and the supraspinatus tendon. So, but if your scapula is protracted, that's going to be closer to them, and that's going to cause like that wall or barrier on it, and that's going to impinge it.
And so it's the acromion and the humerus that's
close together.
Yeah.
But your tendon is basically, like, if you think of your tendon there, your acromial, or your ligament, that coracoacromial ligament, it's kind of like an extension of your bone,
Okay.
like kind of a deal if you think of it that way. So it's going to also cause impingement
Okay.
if it's in that area. Okay. Any other questions? Does that make sense? Okay. So with the shoulder joint, what type of a joint is this?
An acromial.
Good. Which means? Good. How many axes does it move in?
3.
Good. Okay. Again, you'll want to know all the ligaments, as well as like the different parts, like the glenoid labrum, the joint capsule, and the subacromial bursa. You'll want to know what they are, what they do, what they prevent against if they're a ligament. This one you also want to know the shoulder joint movements and the range of motion, which most of those make sense. Like with abduction, you can only abduct to about 120 degrees without like involving another joint with a rotation or something. But and then like adduction, so you're here, adduction. So what, like 75 degrees?
So these are the degrees that you can move that joint allows?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Do we need to know like 180 with shoulder girdle or like what's in parentheses? I guess that would just be common sense.
I don't think so.
Okay.
If it's including the shoulder, that's just talking about the scapulohumeral rhythm that we'll talk about shortly. So, and then again, just knowing the movements of the shoulder and what muscles pertain to each movement. Okay. So convex concave rule. Convex moving on concave rule is always in what relationship to this slide?
Different.
Different. Yeah, opposite. Okay. So Dana, how about you tell me how to do internal rotation? Tell me the rule in the slide guide.
I think my thing is I just can't see it in my brain.
Okay. So when I think of roll, I think of a tire on a surface or like
Okay.
something like that. Okay. So if I'm moving in this direction, the roll is always in the same direction as the moving segment. So the moving segment is anterior. And if you can't see that, if you think of how your humerus is rolling within the socket, it's going to be rolling in this direction.
Okay.
And so if you were to roll in that direction, that's going to keep going like
So
on
it
a
has to
surface.
slide the opposite direction.
Good.
So
Yep.
that it will stop it from like rolling off your joint.
Good.
I always like pretend that this is my scapula and then this is my like arm. And then so if I'm like doing flexion, my arm's gonna be going this way. And so if you're looking at it, it's moving posteriorly like that.
Okay,
Because
that
your arm
makes
is going
sense.
forward. If it's adducting, it's gonna be going like that.
Mm-hmm.
I gotcha.
It's different with flexion and extension though, because that's a spin movement. That's not a roll and slide glide. Do we understand that? So with, because with a spin, it's a matter of spinning on one point. So if I have my my joint, gosh, here, and if I were to do extension coming this way, it's a matter of rotating along that one point. And that's a spin movement, because if you remember the boxes from the previous section when we were discussing these. So that's the spin movement, and so then you're looking at the direction of the humeral head. So that's why those are, with flexion it's posterior, because the humeral head is moving posterior. But even though your segment is moving anterior. So don't get those confused. But when it comes to the other movements though, it's a matter of how the roll is in the same direction as the moving segment. Was that confusing? Did I confuse you guys, or does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. I was just initially thinking, oh, so it moves on the opposite side of the segment, which is true, but you look at the humeral head.
Yeah. So, because flexion, the humeral head movement is usually what it's referring, like the roll.
Yeah.
However, in this case, if you were doing flexion, if you're looking at the segment's moving anterior, but the roll, there is no roll, it's a spin movement, and that's why it's posterior. Okay. So Dana, tell me about abduction.
We did this one yesterday. So it goes.
So without looking at your notes, look at me.
I know.
I want you to look at me so that you can explain it.
So you're doing abduction.
Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna go this way, right?
Correct.
So it's moving superior,
Good.
and it's gonna go. So it's gonna have to spin the opposite direction, right?
Yep.
Because if you continue to do this, if you keep doing this, it's gonna fall off.
Yep, because it's going to move up, right?
Yeah.
It'll
It'll keep spinning without sliding back down.
Mm-hmm. So when you do abduction, that roll is superior, right? So if that
Uh-huh.
keeps rolling,
It's gonna
it's
roll
going to spin up,
superior,
right?
and then it'll slide inferior.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's because it's the convex moving on concave. Because the
Mhm.
roll is always in the opposite
Direction.
way of the slide.
Okay.
Does that help? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Okay.